Oh, hey, look. No, it's not presenting. It's Sunday, January 21st, 2024, 3 p.m. in the afternoon. You're watching Co-op for Two. And today we're here for another session of the Design Diary for High and Low, the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective inspired game that I've been working on with lots of help from others. Before we get started today, let's do a little bit of bookkeeping. On Friday, we actually played the first case ever written for this game. One of the viewers named Water, another programmer, wrote a case called Past Never Dies, which I have right here, and we actually played this on Friday. It's just a little bit of a demonstration case. It doesn't show off many of the new features planned for High and Low, but it was the first case that could actually be played that used the directories, and I quite enjoyed it. It sparked a bunch of discussion, and then I actually had some friends play it here who have never played Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective to get a feel for where are the tripping points in the game. And we did find one, which is that the convention that you read the introduction, then you stop and put away the book until you find leads, was something I hadn't even thought about, and they almost started reading the full leads. Okay. And maybe that's a good place to segue to the fact that if you don't know, there is a local game design competition here in Champaign called Kudo Plays. They've been doing it for many years now, and High and Low is entered into it, not to win, but to motivate deadlines and stuff. And so having one or two demo cases that can be played is important, and be played in a short amount of time, because the playtesters probably don't want to play this game at all. And if they do convince themselves to play it, it has to be something short. So a nice short demo case is important. And I met with them yesterday just to do a little check-in, and we're on track. February 11th is the deadline for that, so we could submit this now. We're in good shape. I see that Adam is in the chat. Adam is the person responsible for this amazing box cover art. And he actually did a couple different versions. We talked about it at the last live stream, and I've actually ordered a prototype box for the game. Very expensive to order just a couple of boxes, and this requires a sort of unusual size box. Unfortunately, it can't be the Sherlock Holmes consultative detecting style boxes because the spiral bindings for these take up too much width. But I did order a couple of boxes using a little quick and dirty mock-up from Adam of the box, and we'll see what those look like. When I get them, I'll show them off, and then we'll worry about a proper full box later. What else, by the way of bookkeeping? You can see I've got my little Mad Goat coffee here. If you're local to Champaign or the area, I'm a huge fan of Mad Goat coffee. They're actually not in Champaign, they're in Danville, but I don't love the Champagne roasters, but these I do love. And this is a brand new coffee they have, an Ethiopian Whoosh Whoosh it's called. And if you're not in the coffee rabbit hole, you got to have some spare time and a high tolerance for pretentious people. But if you're not familiar with coffees and stuff, most of the coffee beans you buy are washed. That's a process that sort of... well, I don't know enough of the technical details, but I know you can basically get beans in washed or natural process. And the natural process, the beans are allowed to ferment a little. So they have a very, a slightly unusual taste, a little fermented, fruity taste. And the light roasted beans even bring that out more. So this is a special coffee they've just come out with, limited edition, that's light roasted and natural processed. And I am enjoying it. I have no relationship with Mad Goat. They're not sponsoring this channel. In fact, I have a little bone to pick with them because I ordered a shirt from them and they sent me some little baby size shirt for little kids, and they don't respond to emails. So if there's a word for anti-sponsorship, that's what I have with them. Last bit of bookkeeping. I think this week, on Wednesday or Thursday, we'll play the final Cryptic Killers game, Murder at Magic Mirror Casino. Is it Murder at Magic Mirror Casino or just Magic Mirror Casino? Okay, Magic Mirror Casino, the last of the Cryptic Killers. I think we'll play that on Wednesday or Thursday. Okay, so... let's talk about what we're going to do today. I've got some slides. I thought I would focus today's discussion on talking about the software that I've been writing and tools and other software that I use for high and low, including a new tool that I've been working on recently. And I've probably got an hour or so of slides to talk through, but I am happy to diverge from that and answer questions and talk about anything people want to talk about, as long as it's not stuff that we've covered in detail on previous live streams. So let's just check in with the chat if there's anything else anyone wants to talk about before we get started. YouTube says 17 concurrent viewers, 2 likes. Seems like we could get a couple more likes on that. Boy, if you're looking for a hobby, watching the YouTube coffee videos is, if you're one of these people who hate watch stuff like I do, and hate watch isn't the right term, it's more like cringe watch. Boy, that is a ripe area for you. If you like cringe watching and hate watching stuff, the coffee videos, you can mine those coffee videos indefinitely. They are really, I don't know the right word. It's not like, it's kind of like grifting. They're just all about marketing their brands when they talk about their coffee, and they're talking about these $1,000 coffee grinders, pretending they can taste the difference between when the burrs are put on counterclockwise. It's so ridiculous. And no one's doing any blind taste testing. They're just pretending they can tell the difference between, it's all in their imagination. It's really ridiculous. But, okay. So, since I don't have any other questions or stuff, I'm just going to get started here. Remember, feel free to interrupt me. I've got my tablet here so I can bring up questions. Just ask your question. Don't wait for me to respond, or ask if you have any questions, and then periodically I'll check in with the chat and I'll see that there are questions left to be answered. Okay, so here we go. Where's my slides here? Okay. Game design. Oh, Rocky Helton says, I love my AeroPress. I'm a big fan of AeroPress. AeroPress has got lots of things going for it, and it's sort of a no-nonsense way to make coffee, and it's portable. AeroPress is the way to go. Rocky is doing it right. I mean, I have an espresso machine. I like my espresso, but AeroPress is a good way to make coffee. Okay. Okay, here we go. So as an overview, I'm going to talk a little bit about the creation of the maps and the tools used for that, and philosophy. Then a bit on the directories, and then on the newest tool that I've been working on, this storybook parser. I see now that I've been working on high and low for 7 months at this point, so quite a bit of time. And there were some periods where I was really ready to throw up my hands. Not fun working on some of this maps and directory stuff. And the idea that I'm spending 6 months creating a simulated phone book is embarrassing. But we're just getting to the point where I can start working on fun stuff. All right, so this is inspired by Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective and the spin-offs for that game. Just as going to do this sort of historically, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, which came out in the 80s, has about 500 locations on its map. It's got one big map of 5 neighborhoods, about 100 in each neighborhood. And then there's a directory, a combined directory that has about 3,200 people and places, I believe. High and Low was originally going to be all of New York City. Became clear that was impossible to do. We may do some expansions with the other boroughs, Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx. But it mostly focuses on Manhattan now. Still, even just Manhattan, High and Low is about 6 times the size of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. 3,500 map locations, 20,000 people and places. So I started by going to the open source GIS, geographic data, that's available from New York City. New York City has a very rich set of open source data available, and dozens of data sets describing all of the streets and the routes of the streets and all of the building profiles, including the heights of each of these buildings, the zoning information, tons of information in lots of different databases. So my first month or so was just exploring these different sets of data, figuring out, do I have to go back to historic 1930s data? Can I even get that data? Or would it be better to use the modern data that's rich and then just sort of age it backwards, which is what I ultimately decided to do. Leaving all that aside, it was clear in making a game for this that we have a problem of information overload. If I just go back a little bit, it's just too much information presented too densely. On the left here, you see Manhattan, which is this big, almost vertical strip of an island here. The other thing that became clear is that this is awkward shape of a place to have a map. Manhattan is very tall and very narrow, And that's not a fun game board to play on. If you imagine your table having a 4-foot tall game board that's a foot wide and 4 foot tall, does not seem right. You could turn it horizontally, but everything feels wrong then. And you could sort of, if you've played Gumshoe, which is behind me here, the epic game by the makers of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, this is the closest comparison to High and Low. And you can see they basically gave up trying to make a map for that. They just said, okay, we're just going to take a regular map of San Francisco. It's too big. And we're not going to worry about putting any locations that you can visit on that map. We're not going to worry about making it so you could actually use it for gameplay. It's just a free map that gives you some theme. And I didn't want to do that. So what was the solution? I came up with what I thought was which probably is the big idea of this game in terms of making it manageable, which is to use the concept of a neighborhood as our sort of fundamental building block. And leverage that, not just in terms of creating maps. Now, instead of one giant map, there's a map for each neighborhood, but also in embracing this idea that a neighborhood is like a small town. It will have its own distinct personality and be small enough that you could stage a case primarily within a neighborhood. It matches well with the sort of lore and way of thinking about Manhattan and New York City as a city of neighborhoods. And then lean into that by exaggerating these neighborhoods. And that's what you've seen in the game. You've seen me show the map atlases, which are paired with descriptions of each neighborhood. So here's the Chinatown map, and here's a photo of Chinatown, history, discussion of the kind of criminal activity that's common, and points of interest. So thinking of it like a tour guide book, where we really lean into each neighborhood having a distinct personality. And part of that was inspired by some of my experience playing these play-by-mail games where we played this cozy mystery set in a small town, and I thought it was going to be the least interesting, but it was the most engaging, and part of that was because it was a mentally manageable model of this small town. So I'm trying to solve that problem that way. Okay, so what were the goals here? Simplify, this is just an example map of a neighborhood, Gramercy Park. Simplify the data for legibility. Okay, so once I started writing code for this, and the code is all written in Python. It's using a library called GeoPandas. Pandas is a very well-known data processing numerical library for working with data, and GeoPandas is the spin-off for handling GIS data. So the goal was to make maps that were suitable for a game. So take all this New York City data and make maps that can actually be reasoned about. And so lots of things got done there. The first thing is that I've chosen to use tax blocks. So they're not individual buildings drawn out there. They're sort of blocks, which might encompass, there could be 20 or 30 buildings within a block. All of the street labels have been in the actual data. There's millions of little line segments for the street names. The street names are all over the place. So the code goes through and it tries to have one placement of each street name. So a given street name, like here you see Broadway running diagonally down, is only listed there once, but it knows if it breaks up, then it can't make it continuous, then it has to have separate copies of the label and makes sure that there's labels on the outside borders. Some work had to be done to de-age stuff that had changed. Not much has changed block-wise. Lots of buildings get torn down in the decades since the 30s, but not much changes to the tax blocks, the big blocks. But some areas do, like the docks area and stuff. And then I spent a lot of time carving up the burrow into neighborhoods. There are disagreements about neighborhood boundaries, and I've taken some liberties with that. And then there are certain names of neighborhoods that are in and out of favor. And I've tried to basically carve it up into a way where each neighborhood is about the same size and about 100 locations for each, which is nice because then I only have to go into double-digit location numbers. There's code that automatically tries to number the blocks. People who play Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective know that sometimes it can be hard hunting for a number. Here I've used a sort of heuristic algorithm to try to number the blocks from left to right, top to bottom. If you're interested in optimization algorithms, it's an interesting question. What's the best way to number a sort of connected graph? I guess you would call it like an undirected graph. I may, if I get some time, experiment with different numbering systems. There's no ideal way to do it, but it would be nice to experiment a little bit more. You can see also that the outlines of neighboring neighborhoods are shown and dulled out. So the program that's doing the visualization is called QGIS. Is that right, or am I blanking on the name now? QGIS. It's an open source mapping tool. It's pretty wonderful. And all new to me, of course. I've never done geographic information systems processing, but QGIS works quite well. And there's lots of scripts I ended up writing to help create these maps and visualize them. For a long time, it looked like we were going to have to, that the maps generated by QGIS were not nice enough looking, did not look period appropriate, and that we were going to have to rely on some heavy hand artistry to get nice looking maps. Eventually, I did manage to find and configure this rendering extension, the style, which is called Pencilish, I believe. There's a bunch of them that are similar. And it's hard to see on this. If I put it, can you see it a little better this way? But it makes it look more like a drawing, and it's good enough that we can use it for the majority of the maps as is, which is nice because my whole, I can wrote down QGIS here. My whole approach to this is keep the data available to work on. This is a tricky, it's a tricky thing to explain, but I want to explain it because it's so important. Do I have a slide on it? Let me see. Yes. Okay. General strategy, suitable maps for games. So here's one of our big problems is this whole project started not being sure what everything would look like. And so one of my guiding principles, which has made life difficult, is to preserve the ability to always go back to the data. And that means that anytime there's something that you could fix by hand modifying it, I've tried to avoid. And that's created a huge extra burden because as soon as you start hand tweaking the data, for example, if you said, okay, this street doesn't belong here or it's wrong, I'm just going to delete it from the data, then I all of a sudden can never go back to the data. And I've had to go back many times during this project when we changed the boundaries of the neighborhoods. All that kind of stuff meant that it was important everything get written in code to generate the next step. So I don't know if I've explained it well, but basically there's a huge amount of code that's sort of creating this pipeline of going from the data to carving it out, cropping it to just Manhattan, and then extracting the neighborhoods and then labeling the different blocks as to what neighborhood they belong in, connecting the streets, doing it all in code. And sometimes there's certain parts of this code that take an hour or two to run. It's kind of unpleasant. Right now, there's about a megabyte of Python source code handling the maps and the directories. If you were going to do it from scratch now and you had some experience with QGIS and PandaGeos, you probably take you half that, but it's a lot of code and quite a bit of data. All right. So a couple of highlights here. I already talked about the QGIS scripts, which are also written in Python, by the way, that are doing stuff like blurring out outside the backgrounds of a given neighborhood and creating this atlas book, and various things showing points of interest only in the active neighborhood, coloring the blocks based on their zoning types, the auto numbering the blocks. Let's see, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's done with the directories. Well, I'll talk about that geolocating in a minute. And then there's a lot of the code that's designed to look for problems. It's sort of when you're dealing with 20,000 locations and these big maps, you can't just scan through it and look for problems. So basically, there's a lot of the code that's sort of generating reports like, here are places that have the same name. Is that right? Should they be at the same name? Here are any locations, any of the 3,000 locations that don't have someone living in them. Identify that stuff. So there's a lot of that going on. And then there's a lot of code for generating the fictional places that is designed to try to put them in appropriate places and not step on the toes of any real places, etc. And what you're looking at here with this hand-drawn art, this is art that Adam drew, little annotations to sort of give a little more flavor to the maps. You can see he's done a little picture of a park here, a hand-drawn of the park, a hand-drawn of a couple of Madison Square Garden, a couple of locations. And this is another example of the basic approach here. It took me a while to figure out how I could export these 35 neighborhood maps in a way that Adam could draw annotations on top of the maps and then bring those in as properly geocoded annotations. So as an end result, if you're just looking at this page in the map, it might look like this is a hand-done map, but it's actually all of that art is keyed to the GIS data. So what it means is if I print out this map on a square piece of paper, or if we generate a map atlas that's a different format, that's all fine. All of the annotations will scale and render and place themselves according to the data. So you could, if you wanted to, after these 35 maps, you could print out a 6-foot by 4-foot map of the entire place, and those annotations would be properly located and look right. So it's all still consistent with the data, and I'm trying not to get away from that. Eventually, some hand editing stuff has to be done, but I'm trying to keep it maximally flexible. Okay, that was part one. Now we're going into directories. Any questions about the map stuff before I move on to directories? Let me point something out. Matt says, "Hi all, sorry I'm late. I got sidetracked fiddling with my MAME emulator trying to get something to work." One of the viewers of this channel, Nicola, who joins us for puzzle games, created MAME. So if you stop by the Discord for this channel, you can talk to the inventor of MAME, which was a very influential, impressive arcade emulator. Okay, let me continue on then, since there are no more questions. All right, the directories. The project is otherwise known as Phonebook Simulator. You've got a white pages and a yellow pages, which I have here. You can see there's the size of them. There's the white page. There are about 12,000 people and 7,000 businesses, I think, in here. And then yellow pages is just businesses arranged by category. Okay, so you've heard me talk about that. At the time, there were really two possibilities I considered. One of them, which was my original plan, was to actually OCR scan real phone books from the 30s. Real yellow pages, real white pages, and get real data about the names of people and businesses. And there's a little bit of that on the, there are some archives on the web of some scanned directories, but they're not quite at the right time period and they're not great quality. But really the big problem was that they're much too big. They're, hundreds of thousands of entries. But also, even if you could get them all in and just say, get rid of, 4/5 of it and just keep the 12, a random subset of 12,000, my conclusion was that that wouldn't give us enough control over the gamey aspects that we want to be able to have some control over. So no way to simplify and exaggerate things for the games, like making Little Italy mostly full of Italians. You'd get the reflection of the real life if you just took a distribution of the OCR'd addresses. But I think for game purposes, you want to be able to exaggerate some of that. You might be able to get away with it for the white pages. For the yellow pages, business is much tougher because really we want a nice distribution of categories and we want the names to be a little more easily identifiable. And we want much more control over saying that there should be a couple hotels in each neighborhood, a couple of restaurants in each neighborhood. All of that would be impossible to do, plus the fact that it's very hard to get all of that information from the yellow pages, get their proper categories. Yellow pages have their own way of breaking up categories that's not so clean, not so easy to bring into what we want control over. So instead, the decision I made was to generate fictional residents. And so first step was figuring out how the neighborhoods break down on demographics. That's done a little ad hoc, but they're in the data, in the configuration files that I've got for my code. I break down the density of the neighborhoods and what ethnic breakdown again, and everything is exaggerated as much as I can. So there's the more ghetto tenement built neighborhoods are packed with people, and then as you go into certain areas uptown, it's much less dense, and the ethnic breakdowns are all exaggerated. Collected a bunch of data of names, first names, last names, and by gender. There's a good website called Fake Name Data where you can get on most of these. Some of these I had to source from other open source databases. And then I'm trying to use some of the New York City data to control zoning. So you saw on the images of the maps, different color coding. Right now that's done based on zoning. So certain areas are zoned commercial and manufacturing and residential and mixed. Whether we stick with that in the end, I'm not sure, but I'm using zoning information for that. And then I'm also doing some fancy stuff with apartment buildings. So in a small town, people live in their houses, but in a big city, lots of people live in apartment buildings. So my population code that tries to spread people out finds where people are bunched together, builds an apartment building. If there's a real apartment building, which I'll get to in a second, it stuffs them in there. Otherwise, at a certain capacity, it starts giving them apartment numbers. And then code is using configuration stuff to do other things like deciding to put family members together and give a certain proportion of the people just their initial, which helps for game design sometimes for creating a mystery, and giving them honorifics, a certain proportion are lords and ladies, etc. Okay, before I move on, there's a question in the chat about funeral homes or coroner's office. There are funeral homes in the directory, but what are they listed under? I think they're listed under, let's see, not under keepers. It's a good question. We do have a couple of C also, and it's clear that sometimes we're going to have to, we may need to improve that. Where are the, I should know this for my own things. Okay, cemeteries and funeral homes are here where you would find that. And I'm going to talk about page numbers in a second. So just, so here we have cemeteries and funeral homes, including undertakers and stuff. The question about coroner's office, I wish I had, did I? No. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the changes to the directories. There's a version of the directories that's available online that Waters' case was written on, and then there have been changes made to it since then. And one of the changes is I've produced a 2-page research guide that has things like where you would go to get certain information. And that's got information about coroner's office and medical examiners and all that. Let me circle back to that in a bit. Okay, so the yellow pages is a little more interesting. It's actually, with the yellow pages, it's combining real data and fictional data. So there's a big file for the fictional places that describe a couple hundred categories. For each one, it talks about, the configuration describes how many of these things to instantiate, how to spread them out over the map. In general, if it's a big category like restaurants, the configuration will say, you know, each neighborhood has to have at least 2, but then there are certain areas that you'll find more of them in. You can see that especially with things like theaters and playhouses. There are certain neighborhoods where there's tons of them. Those like the theater district or the garment district has tons of clothing shops and tailors. So there's that kind of thing. And then each of these categories has some set of generated fictional names or name patterns. ChatGPT was used to automate thousands of potential names, and then that's been hand filtered out. And then there are chain names that are in there, and it knows how to make a chain store in different neighborhoods. And then there's 2,000 or so real places that were appropriate for the time. Those are taken from various sources, including some actual maps, some actual directories. And those real places are mixed in with the fictional places, and there's code so it doesn't step on each other's toes. And you can use data to actually generate maps of where the real places are, but they're sprinkled around. And there's also a couple other things that we use real data for. All the subway stops are real, all the parks and landmarks, all that stuff. The police precincts, as much as possible, were real. So I've tried to use real data as much as possible. That could always be improved. I'd like to, the more we could take real instead of fictional, the better. There are some benefits of using fictional created places, though, and one of them is this part you see here about my last bullet item under part 1. It's that when we populate these fictional places, I can often put the owner of the place nearby. So one of the ways that places are generated, one of the name patterns for places that are generated is it'll use someone's name, like Joe's Restaurant or Ambighelli's Fish Shop. And what it will do is when it creates one of those with a certain likelihood, it says the owner is going to live within a certain distribution. So 50% of the time, the owner will live a block or two away from the store. 80% of the time, it'll at least be in that neighborhood. This is, again, the neighborhood-centric place. Sometimes they live right next door or right above the store. So there's that kind of thing we can do with the fictional places. So there is a benefit of that. Having everything data-driven has some other advantages. It's probably a little hard to see this, but let me take off myself. You can see on the left, here's a plot of where it's populated fictional residents, the Italians. And you can see there are two neighborhoods where the Italians really dominate. One is Little Italy downtown. That's that highly dense purple area at the bottom of the map. And then there's what was called Italian Harlem, uptown. And again, this has been exaggerated, but this is not stuff that the players would have access to, but there's a whole set of directories and resource documents that the case authors can have access to. And the ethnic breakdown is one. On the right, you see a plot of all the hotels in Manhattan. And you can see that the code has made sure that there's a couple in every neighborhood, but then Times Square is packed with hotels. Those are real hotels in Times Square, but there are hundreds and hundreds of pages of the PDF directories with this information. So a case author could look through this electronically, you wouldn't print it out, and see where neighboring hotels are, stuff like that. And there's other directories that are built for case authors, like a per neighborhood directory. Again, stuff that a player wouldn't have access to, but someone writing a case could. And I've talked about leaning into the neighborhood idea. The place that's instantiating all of the businesses tries to make sure each neighborhood is kind of self-sufficient. So there's a couple of everything in each neighborhood, and makes sure each block has something. Now, one thing that was interesting in playing through the Waters case yesterday, and that I've noticed, is that I probably erred too much on the making it, well, let's put it this, let me rephrase it. In Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, you're often faced with the question of like, oh, someone was poisoned. Maybe the poisoner got the poison at a drugstore. So let me look up in the Yellow Pages. You might find 6 chemists, and you might say, okay, this one's nearby. Let me visit them. And one of my concerns with high and low is that if there are 30 chemists in the directory, you don't want the player to visit all 30. You want them to be clever about figuring out which one to visit. And so my idea, again, was lean into this neighborhood idea. And so the guideline is that, you know, people will almost always use the business in their neighborhood or the neighborhood where they live or where they work. And what we've seen is that that's worked a little too well, because for some of these common businesses like hotels or a chemist, there's only 2 in that neighborhood. And if you know that the person would have used the bank in their neighborhood or stayed in a hotel in their neighborhood, it's almost too easy to brute force it. So we've erred too much on the other side. And you might imagine players just being like, all right, crime was committed in this neighborhood. The case is largely about this neighborhood. I'm just going to go to the only bank in this neighborhood, the only restaurant in this neighborhood, the only chemist, and I'll just see if there's anything interesting there. And you don't want that. So I've gone back and tweaked the Yellow Page creator code now, so that now for the common places, like things like hotels, banks, restaurants, diners, cafes, chemists, and a couple more will probably be added to, there's now a chunk of maybe 6 or 7 in each neighborhood. So you won't be able to just assume to look at it quickly and know what it is. So that's a balancing act. And I think maybe we may another solution would be to relax it a little bit and say that people are likely to use a place in the neighborhood or the adjacent neighborhoods where they live or work. These are sort of conventions, but we have to balance. You want to have a clue. Like, You want to have a clue that if the person is at a French restaurant nearby, you want to have to look a little bit to find the French restaurant rather than just be like, okay, there's only one restaurant in the neighborhood. It's obviously where they went. So that's a little bit of experimentation. But that does bring me to the last point on this list, which is another thing that's been a lot of work and a big pain, but was clearly going to be important, is that all of the code generating this fictional data was written so that I could easily lock in places. So that if someone's writing a case now, and I want to completely remake the directories, I can very easily say, here's the list of people and places that were used in the cases that we know about that were written in the next year, let's say, before this becomes finalized. And then I can say, okay, lock those in, and then create the fictional stuff around it. So a lot of the code deals with that. It says, if there are real hotels in this neighborhood, I don't have to generate fictional ones. If there are real people that are used in other cases that live in this apartment of this apartment building, then if I regenerate the fictional data, I have to lock in those and everything gets created around it. So quite a bit of trouble doing that stuff, but it has paid off because it means I can now very much change the generated data here and still preserve all of the locations and people that are being used in the cases that are being written now. Okay, and then there's quite a bit of code generated, designed to generate the actual directories. Now, I've been through some real hassle getting this code to look right, laid out, and the general strategy that I've been adopting is to render it to HTML, and then from HTML to PDF using some headless browsers, which have their own issues when the data gets too big. So there's lots of stuff that generates this in multiple parts. But you can see I've been experimenting with it a little more, making these directories look a little bit better when there are common headings like New York City Department of Planning, Corrections, etc. And then you can see people filled into an apartment building. And there's various other ways where it's now trying to do better with laying out people, like if there's different departments at a library, it doesn't have to repeat the full address each time. Again, remember, these aren't hand edited. This is all generated programmatically from data. And then the yellow pages here, we've got a couple hundred ads that were scanned, and it's sticking them in and sizing them for the yellow pages. It all works fairly well, but it's clear now that the HTML to PDF pipeline is not going to be suitable for final version. And the main reason for that is page numbers. We can't get good indexes and page numbers with this putting it in HTML. There is no good way to do it. There's some very painful, ugly ways that might be done. So the new approach is going to be from code to LaTeX to PDF. LaTeX is an old and well-known layout language and tool chains for doing that. And I'm not familiar with it, though probably given my background, I should be. But that's the next step for laying out the directories. And maybe with that will give us a little more freedom, not just to have good indices, but do some other stuff. Rob's been advocating for running headers in the directories. That's where at the top of a phone book, for example, if you look at a real phone book, you'll typically see at the upper right, it'll tell you the last couple letters like FRA, and here FIN, so that you could quickly glance through and find your place. And you can see for yellow pages, we've got an index that's programmatically generated, but no page number. So that's another thing. And in Waters' case, this is the thing that pushed me over the line. he created this case, and he did something that you have not seen in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. He actually has an index for leads and what page number they're on. And then in some of these leads where it says jump to this, it tells you what page to jump to. And it's clear that this is a huge win in terms of reducing frustration, because normally you'd have to look up 044 and you'd have to find it. It just takes some extra steps. And so LaTeX is the way to go. So that's one of the things I'm starting to work on right now. And there may be other benefits. For example, it was pointed out that that on Friday, when I played Waters' case, for example, I was looking up hotels, and I got to hotels, and I got to here, and I thought, okay, and my instinct was, okay, hotels are done. Now, what happened was hotels are not done, they continue, but the layout of these yellow page ads decided it wouldn't fit here, and so it broke. Now, in real layout, and if you want to know how they really laid out phone books back in the day, it was incredible. Why am I blanking on the name of the machine that was so common? The typesetting, Linotype. If you want a little piece of history, go to YouTube and search for Linotype machines. Linotype machines were the machines, the modern typesetting machines they used in newspapers and in making phone books. And basically, it's like a big, giant typewriter, you know, that's this 5 foot by 5 foot by 10 foot that an operator would sit at. And they type on the typewriter, and as they type, they cause metal type blocks to fall down and get strung out into a line, which then dips down into molten lead that's by their feet, presses out through the mold, and creates a one-time temporary metal slug of type that gets brought over and put through a press to generate the print, and then gets reused, recycled back in the metal pot of molten lead. It's an incredible, bizarro concept as a modern person to wrap your head around. But what led me to this is in the real Yellow Pages, if you look, what you'll see is when they got these blank spaces, they filled them in with generic ads for like the Yellow Page company. Rob says there's a great documentary about the Linotype on YouTube called Linotype the Film. I highly recommend it. It's one of these things like when you see that occasionally you'll see a YouTube video of like showing teenagers rotary phones and watching them not know how to use it. Go watch the video on Linotype. You almost can't wrap your head around the concept of how much work was involved producing newspapers. Anyway, I hope that with LaTeX we can programmatically do a better job of laying out some of this stuff. Okay, how are we doing on time? 50 minutes. I think we're okay. This is the last part of this presentation, just a couple of slides talking about the latest tool I've been working on, which has been a huge pleasure. The directory and the map stuff has been quite painful. And the reason why it's painful is because some of these functions take half hour, 45 minutes to run. So like I'll make a change, I'll run it, 45 minutes later I get an error. And finding problems in big directories is very difficult. So it's kind of painful. And part of that is because some of my code using GeoPandas is not efficient, and probably a better person more familiar with that library would do a better job of it. But part of it is just the nature of having, 50,000 buildings and trying to evenly distribute people. It's just a mess. So it is very fun to now go back to a coding project, this little standalone utility that's much more enjoyable. So what I've been working on for the last couple of weeks is a tool to make it easier to write cases. Easier to write high quality cases is how I've bulleted this. And the idea is to let people write a case, like this case here that Water wrote. Water did not use my tool, but to write a case, like if you played Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, you know that there's introduction, then there are leads that are numbered, that are sorted in different categories. So my idea was go from make it easy to write it in something like Google Docs, which we've been using for collaborative editing, or any plain text editor, and let a writer annotate that and then go from that to produce a nice playable book for a case. So there's lots of sort of busy work that gets done, especially if you have lots of things where you say, if you have this, go read this paragraph, otherwise go read this paragraph. If you played something like Gumshoe that had to be all done by hand, that's a lot of unpleasant busy work. So the idea is to get rid of all of that and then be able to produce PDFs that have nice clickable links, that have a nice index page, that can produce output in different formats. Like when you're playing a case, if you're using it online, you probably want one lead per page so that you don't get any spoilers. But if you're printing it out, you want a more compact format. There's lots of things you can do if you automate the production of these books. You can make it easier to translate. And then you can do a whole bunch of stuff to make it easier for the author to write good cases, like report when there are problems, especially since everything is data-driven now. When this utility goes through a case, it can say, hey, you've used a lead number 4365, or if you were doing Sherlock Holmes 5 out Southwest, which doesn't have a matching entry in the data or matches with a different name than you've specified in your label, stuff like that. And there's some other bonus stuff you can do, like generate some nice plots of the connectivity and the logic leaps of this suggest the player should be able to go here, etc. I'm going to show you a little sample of that. And then another thing that's become clear is that if we use this tool to annotate, if we have an annotation language for describing a case, in addition to being focused on producing low-tech printable books to play, we can also use that information to make a sort of online playable case. And we're exploring a little bit of that now. So here's just an example of the kind of thing that's happening here. On the left is what you would write in Google Docs or in your plain text editor. It's based on Markdown. That's what that hashtag is. That's like a Markdown header. And this syntax, you can see it's got the lead number and then a label, and then just text in Markdown, and then some extra functions you can call. So this is an example of how you could write text that would actually tell the utility to create some branched separate leads. So you can see on the left, the person has written, they go to a place and then they've got an option if they want to smash down the door. And if they do, they gain this tag, which the author thinks of as a tag called Broken Hand. And then they've had some comments. And then when it renders out through the utility, you can see it's created this lead. And now it's branched off those three choices into three separate leads that it's assigned random numbers that it knows because it has access to the data. It knows there aren't real places there. Those are free lead numbers. And then when they gain the tag Broken Hand, it's called that B, so it doesn't leak information. If there were other Bs, it would come up with a different number. And then it's used some standard language for describing how you work, what happens when you gain a tag. And there's a whole bunch of other little functions in there to do certain common things. And that's the idea. It's still in the early stages. If you decide you want to work on a case for high and low, in the Discord, we're talking about this case. I'm happy to write lots of help and lots of if someone has new idea of something that would save some time and work, let me know. That's just an example of it being used. And then here's just an example of different layout options. On the left, we have one column printout. On the right, There's an example of a 2-column printout. This is Martinez's case that he's been working on. So I've blurred stuff out so you don't read it. And then here's just a quick example. It's probably hard to see, of the kinds of reports that can be generated by the tool. Like it's telling you all the different, whoops, I don't want you looking at those tags, but different examples of reports so you could check it and see if you've got problems. If you're curious where all the places where this tag was assigned or checked, or etc. And then here is a nice little fun thing that it can generate from your case, which is sort of a map of plot. So I've blurred it so doesn't give away any spoilers, but it's basically showing you all the leads and then how you might go from one lead to another. The green little arrows and blocks are those places where you saw like a thing says, if you have this, jump to this or this. And then there are other leads that require some annotations in the story, like you would have to do it by hand. You might write in your story, like, this lead implies the person could figure out to go to the coroner. So you write a little line in your story text that says, this implies this, and then the plot knows to generate a link between that. That's the different colored links. There are links here for when you gain a tag and when a tag is checked. That's what some of these different colors are. The tool that's actually rendering these graphs, automatically laying them out, is called GraphViz, which is a tool I've used in the past. It's actually fairly good at automatically figuring out layouts for this stuff. I did want to mention there are a bunch of other tools that fall under this heading of interactive fiction. They share this idea that the tool is focused on making it easy for a writer to just focus on writing. So normally it's markdown or plain text or somewhat similar. I thought about using an existing tool. Most of them, though, are designed for online play. And they have some more sophisticated things. All of them have at their focus a kind of branching setup. But the existing tools are a little bit different in their focus on making something that's online playable. And although I think we'll grow this tool to allow games to be played online, I'm much more focused on physically laying out printed material. And so it turned out, from my opinion, that the existing tools weren't quite appropriate, but you might want to check out Twine and some others if you're curious. And probably the tool that I've been working on will start to add some of these features so that games can be played online. I don't think that's the best place to play them, but for play testing, it's actually very useful. And I guess the last thing I'll leave you with, this is my last slide, is one of the things that this parser tool, this utility, has reawakened in me. Is this idea of using this system for play-by-mail cases. Those are even a little bit closer to my heart as a format for playing these games than Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. We've played a couple on the channel by a company called Murders by Mail. You basically use the same setup. You've got maps, you've got directories. It's just that instead of turning to a book to read what you encounter when you go there, you submit your moves online and then you get a letter in the mail a week later. And it's just a different feel of the game. It's much more prolonged game, and the encounters tend to be much longer. And if you've looked at my earlier developer diary on writing my first case, I've got page-long interactions. So I'm very excited about the idea of using that and evolving it to a system where you could write a case that a backend was generating replies to be played, to be sent through the mail or be sent as delayed. So I think it's almost certain that I will evolve that system, that tool, to eventually support a kind of play-by-mail format for these kinds of cases. So if you're interested in exploring writing Sherlock Holmes consulting detective style cases, but in a play-by-mail format where people submit their moves online and then get a physical letter or emailed a PDF, come talk to me. I'd like to explore that more. All right, well, that's it. An hour and 2 minutes, not bad. Looks like I know what I'm doing occasionally. Any questions? Anything you guys want to talk about before we wrap this up? So my focus now, I've got two things I'm trying to do. First of all, I have to make the move to LaTeX for that tool, because Water has demonstrated the value of being able to do page numbers and stuff, and then move to LaTeX for the directories, and then work on, finally, I'm going to be able to work on cases, writing a demo case or getting back to writing my campaign cases. It's clear that there are a couple people now who are starting to write cases for high and low. And the Discord, there's a link to the Discord on the About page of YouTube. It's clear that some of the new mechanics that I've written about and proposed for high and low are sort of are not described well enough for people to wrap their heads around writing into a case. And so it's clear that some good example cases that use all of the new ideas are needed. Now, Martinez Conradi has been working on a case that's pretty cool, and I've been helping with that does make use of some of it. So I've been helping out with that. I'm itching to make a case of my own. I want to make like a violent case, like a violent crime case that sort of shocks the conscious. I've talked about this whole project being a laboratory for experimenting, and I'm sort of curious about experimenting with a more adult case. Rob says, what's the planned release date for the tool? Matt says, I might want to wait until these tools are done to write a full case, but I'll write a short standalone case. Yeah. Probably in a couple weeks, all of the software I've talked about will be open source. I think I've already open sourced an older version of the GIS data processing stuff, but I will put all of that up. And then this parser tool will go up in the next couple weeks once I get a chance to write more documentation on it. And maybe we can try to get that in a container so people don't have to install Python and the helper utilities for it. But you will be able to use the generator tool to download it and use it yourself soon. And I'm happy to talk about, anytime anyone wants some advice or to talk about how to do it on the Discord. Matt says, can't code or read code, well, I understand it. Yeah, it's not, you don't need to know how to code to write this. But the one thing that is needed is more sample cases. The problem is that I've been working with Martinez to make his case formatted for this tool, and he uses some of the advanced stuff, but I can't share it because I don't want to spoil that case. So I need to write a demonstration case that shows off the features of high and low and shows off how to do all that, write all that in the syntax of this parser. And I think once that's done, everyone will have an easier job writing cases, because they'll be able to say, okay, here's this case, here's how it looks on paper, here's how it works. Now let me see how it looks in the syntax and base it on there. So I think once a reasonably good demonstration case can be provided, it doesn't have to be a good mystery, just have to show off the features. Matt says, when you say a demo case, do you mean a standalone or full campaign with multiple days? Well, I think ideally it would be a multiple day case, but short and simple, that just uses all of the features. So a multiple day case is important to demo because it's a new concept that people don't know how to write cases for it. So I do think it's important to have like a 2-day case with the proper end of day briefing questions and a proper epilogues and evidence and all of the features in as short a form as possible. But it has to be multiple day, I think. Otherwise, that's one of the key things that people don't know how to write. Of course, you can write case any way you want, but people obviously want to see an example of it so they understand what the idea is. A lot of the features that I'm pushing for high and low are more of conventions. They're more like, here's a philosophy, and it just needs an example so they can see, oh, I get it. I can see what the design philosophy was here. And then if you don't want to do it that way, you don't have to, but at least you can see what the intention was. Rob says, you could host it online so users don't have to download anything. Well, that's a great idea. If we can set up a nice Python environment where it's hosted online, all the better. I've talked about, since we're here just talking, I have talked about how I don't see any commercial viability for this game, just mainly because the expense of producing these huge stack of documents, and they have to be spiral bound, they're too big not to be, seems impractical, which is completely fine with me. This does not have to be a commercial enterprise. The one thing that I mentioned, though, which is a little exciting to me, is the idea of a play-by-mail system. That feels like a little more plausible, a longer-term project. If we set up the infrastructure, the back-end servers for... There are so few play-by-mail games. Murders by Mail is the only company doing it, really, that I know of, doing it the kind of way I want. And we played through those 3 games and loved them, or loved one of them and liked the others. And I really like that system. So I'm actually very intrigued by the possibility of saying, okay, here's the set of these documents that maybe you would buy with the expectation that you could play through many play-by-mail cases. A big campaign, or different authors write different ones, and the idea that you would have this experience, this more deluxe play-by-mail experience that you would play through multiple cases written for it is a little more intriguing, and a little more seems like might be something worth someone subscribing to. So maybe. Of course, that could be done without some paying for it either. If you didn't have to actually send the mail, if they just got emailed a PDF, that would be fine. But it might be enough of a deluxe experience that it would start to justify the cost, right? Like you would sign up for a year's worth of cases, and you get these, and the rest of them you play by mail. Anyway, just an idea. Debbie says, the problem with play-by-mail, it's essentially a job. You'd have to monitor and maintain it constantly. It's true. It's true. It's true. The murders by mail people have basically said that as well, that it's hard for them to keep up with the work involved in sending out mail every day. If you did it by email, if you emailed PDFs, it would kill off some of the fun, but you could still, we are going to do it. This will be developed into a play-by-mail system eventually, at least the emailing of PDF replies that are delayed. So it's sort of, we might not actually be sending mail, but we will make a system where you have to wait a week to get a reply. That may not sound appealing. Why would you make a game where you force a player to wait a week before they get a reply? But there is a different, if you watch some of the play-by-mails, or even the Dear Homes that we do on Sundays, there is a very different vibe when you have to wait a while. Debbie says you have to consider paying the people working on it, volunteering to work on odd cases, very different from having to do it on a regular basis. Yeah, absolutely. That would be, if if any money comes in this project, it'll go right out to the project or the people working on it. If you did try to do a commercial venture, you'd have to pay people working on it and writing the cases, whatever. I'm not interested in business or running any of that. But you could imagine a case where someone might come and say, hey, we'll do that part of it. And we'll pay the writers and we'll handle, like maybe the Murders by Mail could say, oh, we could use that system for that. And we're set up to do the mailings, so you don't have to. Or you could use a service that takes a PDF and creates a letter out of it, so you don't have to do that work. Adam says, PDF for players wanting to print out just for making case notes might be a preference over color for some. Adam says, block zone colors should be very clearly distinguishable in grayscale as well. That's an interesting point. Well, again, one of the really nice things about having everything programmatically generated, this is exactly that point. Adam is saying it would be nice if you had a version of the maps that were colorblind friendly or for people making black and white, etc. This is a perfect example of why it was so important to me that we keep everything in data form, because I can now go regenerate this map atlas here, but instead of colors, use different hash marks to distinguish instead of colors. So in 15 minutes, I can generate a whole new book that is in black and white and uses different patterns. And that's the kind of thing that why all that work went in to keep this in data form rather than move to hand customized version of it where you can't go backwards. Anything else? Next Sunday at 3 p.m., we will be back to playing Dear Holmes. There is a new case that is not yet completed, but will be completed in time. We've got enough backlog to guarantee it. So next Sunday at 3 p.m., we'll be playing the next case of Dear Holmes. Well, I don't remember the name of it. If you haven't been following, I've been talking about play-by-mail games. Dear Holmes is a play-by-mail game. It's not quite a game, but anyway, that'll be this coming Sunday at 3 p.m. All right, we'll end it here. Thank you all for joining me as usual. These developer design diary streams will probably be picking up pace as this one has. Next one will be less than a month away. I'm not sure what we'll talk about. Maybe we can talk about writing cases and stuff like that. If you're interested in working on a case for high and low, I hope you will stop by the Discord and we can talk about it. There's all channels for case authors. I'd love to be able to... writing these cases is difficult, and especially for people who have never done it before, which is really all of us except for a couple. But there are a couple of people who are interested in writing stories but aren't really prepared to write the mechanics of a case. And it might be nice to be able to connect people. Michelle Hinn, who worked on the backgrounds for the neighborhoods, the history stuff here, is very interested in writing some cases, but is not really prepared to do the mechanics of designing a plot, but would be interested in doing writing. So it might be nice to sort of let people match up, one person writing story and plot and one person doing the mechanics and stuff. And other people helping out in other ways. For example, Debbie Levy, who's done an amazing job helping edit some of these cases. So teamwork. All right. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you all next time.